December 14th, 1944. The snow-laden forests of the Ardennes, Belgium. Staff Sergeant Raymond Miller of the 2nd Armored Division sat perched in the gunner's seat of his M10 tank destroyer, certain that the quiet sector they'd been assigned would remain exactly that, quiet. The war was going their way, after all. Hitler's forces were in retreat, and everyone knew the Germans had nothing left to throw at the Allies. Just 3 more weeks of this post, and we'll be celebrating Christmas in a warm French village, Miller told his crew. They had no idea they were sitting directly in the path of Hitler's last desperate gamble, what would soon become known as the Battle of the Bulge. Before we dive into this story, drop a quick hi in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. It really helps support the channel. This is the story of how one American tank destroyer gunner's unauthorized firing technique, developed against direct orders and military doctrine, would become the decisive factor in stopping an entire column of elite German Panzer tanks, forever changing not only the lives of the men involved, but military combat doctrine itself. Dawn broke cold and misty on December 16th, 1944. Staff Sergeant Raymond Miller, a 24-year-old former factory worker from Ohio, had been assigned to the 702nd Tank Destroyer Battalion attached to the 2nd Armored Division. He had earned a reputation as something of a rebel, brilliant but stubborn. His commanding officer, Captain William Harrington, had repeatedly reprimanded him for his unorthodox ideas about gunnery. For the last time, Miller, you will follow standard firing procedure, Harrington had shouted just 3 days prior. The manual exists for a reason. 1 round, confirm hit, adjust, fire again. Your idea about rapid succession firing patterns is wasteful of ammunition and violates every principle of tank destroyer doctrine. Miller had merely nodded, but in his mind, he continued refining his theory. Before the war, he had worked for 6 years in the Youngstown Steel Works operating heavy machinery, developing an intuitive sense of mechanical rhythms and timing. He'd been particularly fascinated by the metallurgical testing lab, where he'd observed how repeated stress at specific intervals could cause metal fatigue in ways that single impacts could not. During his training at Fort Hood, Miller had spent countless hours in the technical library studying German tank armor specifications captured from manufacturing facilities in occupied France. He'd noticed that the German steel, while exceptionally hard, had particular crystalline properties that might make it vulnerable to precisely timed repeated impacts. Late at night, while other soldiers played poker or wrote letters home, Miller filled notebooks with calculations and diagrams. He believed that firing 3 precisely timed shots in rapid succession, what he called rhythmic hammering, could overcome the superior armor of German tanks by concentrating force on the same spot, creating metal fatigue before penetration. The standard American doctrine of shoot and observe wasted the potential energy of sequential impacts, he argued. His theory wasn't just about hitting the same spot. It was about hitting it at precise intervals that would exploit the physical properties of German armor plate. The Germans are overconfident in their armor, Miller explained to his loader, Private James Wilson, a skinny 19-year-old from Virginia. They think it's impenetrable, but everything has a breaking point if you hit it right. Wilson nodded enthusiastically. Like my pa always said about chopping down trees, 3 perfect strikes in the right spot beats 10 scattered ones. Their driver, Corporal Frank Delgado, a former taxi driver from New York City with nerves of steel, was less convinced. That's all well and good, but the captain will have your stripes if he catches you experimenting with his equipment. Then he better not catch me, Miller replied with a half-smile. 30 miles away, Oberstleutnant Klaus Weber stood before a map in the command tent of the 2nd SS Panzer Division. At 38, Weber was one of the most experienced tank commanders in the Wehrmacht, with battle honors from Poland, France, and the Eastern Front. The son of a prominent Berlin physician, Weber had attended military academy and believed completely in German technological superiority. Our Panthers and Tigers are invincible against the Americans' inferior tanks, he informed his officers. Their 75mm guns cannot penetrate our frontal armor, even at close range. We will break through their lines and reach the Meuse River within 72 hours. His intelligence officer, Major Hans Muller, studied the terrain maps. Our reconnaissance indicates light resistance in Sector G7, primarily infantry with minimal armor support, perfect for our breakthrough point. What neither knew was that the minimal armor support included Miller's tank destroyer, dug into a defensive position at a critical road junction. At 0530 hours, the Germans launched their attack under cover of an artillery barrage. The sound of distant explosions woke Miller's crew. Radio reports flooded in. The Germans had launched a massive offensive all along the front. Captain Harrington's voice crackled over the radio. All units, we have reports of heavy German armor advancing through the forest. Maintain positions and prepare for contact. Miller quickly organized his crew. Their M10 tank destroyer, though equipped with a powerful 3-inch gun, had relatively thin armor compared to tanks. Only 25 millimeters at its thickest point, compared to the Sherman's 76 millimeters or the Panther's 80 millimeters frontal armor. Its advantage was its maneuverability and lower profile, allowing it to hide and ambush heavier German tanks. The M10 had been designed specifically for the tank destroyer doctrine that emphasized mobility and firepower over protection. Weighing 30 tons, it could reach speeds of 30 miles per hour on roads. Its open turret gave the crew excellent visibility, but left them exposed to artillery fragments and small arms fire. The 3-inch, 76.2 millimeters M7 gun could penetrate up to 92 millimeters of armor at 1,000 yards when firing M79 armor-piercing ammunition, enough to defeat a Panzer IV, but struggling against the frontal armor of Panthers and Tigers unless hitting at perfect angles or vulnerable spots. Miller had modified their standard ammunition loadout against regulations, reducing the number of high-explosive rounds in favor of more armor-piercing shells. He'd also convinced the battalion supply sergeant to provide them with the newer M93 shells that had slightly better penetration characteristics. Check ammunition, Wilson. Make sure the shells are arranged in order of priority, AP rounds first. Delgado, make sure we have a clear exit path if we need to relocate. Remember our training, hit and move. By 0700 hours, the first reports of German armor sightings came through. The fog and snow limited visibility to less than 300 meters in most areas, creating perfect conditions for ambush tactics. Lieutenant Colonel Otto Schmidt, commanding the lead elements of Weber's Panzer Force, ordered his tanks to advance in a staggered column formation. With 15 tanks, a mix of Panthers and Tigers, he expected minimal resistance. American forces in this sector are inexperienced, Schmidt briefed his commanders. Intelligence reports their 2nd Armored Division has committed most of its strength further north. We will exploit this weakness. The German tank commanders stood attentively as Schmidt outlined the battle plan. Each had been selected for their experience and unwavering loyalty to the Reich. Hauptmann Klaus Müller, commanding the 2nd Platoon of 5 Panthers, had fought in Russia since 1941 and survived the brutal retreat from Stalingrad. Oberleutnant Wilhelm Braun led the 3rd Platoon with 3 Panthers and 2 Tiger tanks, having earned the Knight's Cross for his actions in Normandy. The final platoon was led by Hauptmann Dieter Hoffmann, a recent transfer from the Eastern Front whose tank bore 13 kill markings, 8 Russian T-34s and 5 American Shermans. Remember, Schmidt continued, speed is essential. We must reach the Meuse River before the Americans can organize a coherent defense. Maintain radio silence except for emergencies. Any questions? There were none. The commanders saluted crisply and returned to their vehicles, where crews were performing final checks on engines and weapon systems. Schmidt's gunner, Feldwebel Heinrich Bauer, had served with him since Poland. The Americans always panic when they see our Panthers. Their Sherman tanks might as well be made of cardboard. The statistics supported their confidence. The German Panther tank weighed 45 tons compared to the Sherman's 30 tons. Its frontal armor was 80 millimeters thick at a 55-degree angle, making effective thickness closer to 140 millimeters. By comparison, American tank destroyers could typically only penetrate 90 millimeters of armor at combat ranges. Miller's position overlooked a narrow road cutting through dense forest, one of the few paths suitable for tanks in the difficult Ardennes terrain. His crew had spent the previous day meticulously camouflaging their position with pine branches and snow, making them nearly invisible. They had positioned themselves on a slight rise that provided both concealment and a perfect firing angle down the approaching road. Miller had personally surveyed the terrain, measuring distances to various landmarks and calculating firing solutions in his notebook. If they come through here, he'd told his crew the night before, we'll have about 8 seconds to make our first shots count before they spot our position. Delgado had questioned the decision to position so close to the road. Seems like we're asking for trouble, Sarge. Standard doctrine says to maintain at least 500 yards distance for quick withdrawal. Miller had shaken his head. At 500 yards, our shells won't have enough velocity to damage their frontal armor. We need to be closer. Trust me. The crew had spent a cold, uncomfortable night in their position, taking turns on watch while the others tried to catch what sleep they could in the cramped confines of the tank destroyer. The temperature had dropped to 15 degrees below freezing, and their breath formed icy crystals on their woolen scarves. At 0742 hours, Miller's radio man, Sergeant Paul Roberts, a former insurance salesman with exceptional hearing, reported, "Tank engines approaching from the east, Sarge. Heavy ones from the sound." Roberts had developed an uncanny ability to identify German tanks by the distinctive pitch and rhythm of their engines, a skill that had saved the crew on more than one occasion. Miller peered through his binoculars. Through gaps in the fog, he could make out the distinctive silhouette of a Panther tank, followed by more. He quickly counted 5, then 10, then 15 vehicles. "Jesus," whispered Delgado. "That's a whole company." "Radio command," Miller ordered Roberts. "Tell them we have at least 15 heavy German tanks advancing on Route 17. Captain Harrington's voice came back immediately. "Hold position, but do not engage unless detected. Reinforcements are 3 hours away at minimum. Conserve ammunition and follow standard engagement protocols." Miller exchanged glances with his crew. They all knew what 3 hours meant. They would face the German column alone. As the lead Panther approached to within 800 meters, Miller made his decision. "We're going to engage. Wilson, load armor piercing. Delgado, be ready to reverse and relocate after the third shot." "But the captain said," Roberts began. "I know what he said," Miller cut him off. "But if we let this column through, they'll break our lines and kill hundreds. We have to stop them here." Miller watched through his scope as the lead Panther drew closer. 700 meters. 600 meters. At 500 meters, he gave the order. "Target lead tank, center mass." Oberleutnant Karl Hoffmann, commanding the lead Panther, felt confident as his tank rounded the bend in the road. His gunner, Unteroffizier Werner Schultz, scanned the forest edge through his sight. "Nothing moving, sir. The Americans must have withdrawn." Hoffmann nodded approvingly. "Maintain formation and speed. We'll reach the crossroads by." His words were interrupted by a sharp crack as Miller fired his first shot. The 3-inch shell struck the Panther's frontal armor and bounced off. Inside the German tank, the crew felt the impact but remained unharmed. "American tank destroyer, 2 o'clock, shouted Schultz, rotating the turret. But before he could acquire the target, Miller fired again, precisely 1.7 seconds after the first shot, hitting the exact same spot on the Panther's armor. The second shell struck the metal weakened by the first impact, creating a small fracture in the armor but still not penetrating. Hoffmann ordered, "Return fire," but it was too late. Miller's third shot, exactly 1.7 seconds after the second, hit the same spot again. This time, the shell smashed through the compromised armor, detonating inside the tank's fighting compartment. The Panther erupted in flames, blocking the narrow road. Schmidt, in the second tank, watched in shock as Hoffmann's Panther exploded. Impossible. That was frontal armor. His own tank maneuvered around the burning wreck, only to face Miller's gun. Again, the American fired 3 shots in the same rhythmic pattern. Crack, 1.7 seconds. Crack, 1.7 seconds. Crack. The third shell penetrated Schmidt's Panther as well, igniting the ammunition stored inside and sending its turret flying 30 meters into the air. Panic spread through the German column. 2 Panthers knocked out by an unseen enemy in less than a minute. The narrow road prevented them from spreading out, while the dense forest on either side restricted their movement. Oberstleutnant Weber received the radio call while advancing with the second wave. Lead elements reporting heavy losses. American ambush. Weber's face darkened. Impossible. How many American tanks? Unknown, sir. At least one tank destroyer, possibly more. Weber couldn't believe a single American vehicle could stop his Panthers. Order the column to push forward. They must break through. Back at the ambush point, Miller's crew worked with precision. Wilson loaded shells with mechanical efficiency. After each three-shot sequence, Delgado would reverse their position slightly, preventing German gunners from zeroing in on their muzzle flash. Third target acquired, Miller announced, training his sight on the next Panther, trying to maneuver around the burning wrecks. Crack. 1.7 seconds. Crack. 1.7 seconds. Crack. The third Panther suffered the same fate as the first two, its armor failing under the precisely timed impacts. By now, German commanders realized they were facing a deadly trap. The fourth Panther attempted to retreat, but the narrow road was blocked by burning tanks. As the driver desperately tried to maneuver into the forest, Miller applied his technique again. 3 shots. 3 perfect hits in the same spot. Another explosion. Captain Harrington received Miller's report with disbelief. Say again, Miller. For Panthers destroyed. Yes, sir. My firing technique works. The rhythmic hammering creates metal fatigue. 3 hits in the exact same spot, timed perfectly, and even Panther frontal armor fails. Harrington was silent for a moment. Continue engagement. Reinforcements are being redirected to your position. Godspeed, Miller. The battle continued for another hour. Miller's crew, changing positions after each engagement, systematically destroyed 7 Panthers and 2 Tiger tanks before running low on ammunition. Weber, listening to increasingly desperate radio calls from his forward units, finally ordered a retreat. Pull back and regroup. Find another route. It was the first time in his career he had been stopped by what appeared to be a single American vehicle. By noon, American reinforcements arrived to find Miller's exhausted crew and 9 destroyed German tanks. The forest road resembled a scrapyard of twisted German armor, each vehicle bearing the distinctive pattern of 3 hits in exactly the same location. Captain Harrington approached Miller's position. The young sergeant stood at attention, prepared for reprimand for disobeying orders about firing protocol. Instead, Harrington extended his hand. Your insubordination just saved an entire sector, Miller. Tell me exactly how this firing technique of yours works. Miller explained his theory about metal fatigue and the precise timing between shots. It's all about rhythm, sir. The first shot weakens the molecular structure of the armor. The second shot, exactly 1.7 seconds later, creates microscopic fractures before the metal can redistribute the stress. The third shot, another 1.7 seconds later, exploits those fractures for penetration. Harrington studied the destroyed Panthers, noting the pattern of impacts. Why 1.7 seconds specifically? That's the resonance frequency I calculated for German armor plate based on its thickness and composition, Miller replied. Too fast, and the metal doesn't have time to begin weakening. Too slow, and it recovers. 1.7 seconds is the sweet spot. Word of Miller's success spread quickly. Within days, ordnance officers from Army headquarters arrived to interview him and examine the destroyed German tanks. Colonel James Patterson of Army Ordnance Research was particularly interested. You developed this theory from your factory experience? Miller nodded. Yes, sir. I noticed that repeated impacts at specific intervals could break materials that would resist a single, stronger blow. Patterson made detailed notes. This contradicts everything in our gunnery manuals, but the results speak for themselves. While American forces analyzed Miller's technique, the Germans struggled to understand what had happened. Oberstleutnant Weber faced difficult questions from his superiors. How could American guns penetrate Panther frontal armor? Demanded General Sepp Dietrich, commander of the 6th Panzer Army. Weber had no satisfactory answer. The Americans must have deployed a new weapon, her general. Our intelligence failed us. Technical experts examining the recovered Panthers were confused by the damage patterns. German engineer Dr. Fritz Hoffmann reported, the penetration points show unusual characteristics. 3 perfectly aligned impacts, creating a cumulative effect our armor design didn't anticipate. The Germans responded by ordering tanks to maneuver constantly during engagements, never presenting the same armor section for consecutive hits. a tacit acknowledgement of the new American technique. By January 1945, Miller's rhythmic hammering technique had been taught to tank destroyer units across the European theater. Training manuals were hurriedly revised, and gunners practiced the precise 1.7-second firing interval using metronomes. The psychological impact on German tank crews was significant. Hauptmann Johann Richter, captured after abandoning his undamaged Panther during a later engagement, explained during interrogation, "We heard about the American gun that could punch through our armor like paper. Many crews lost confidence in our tank's protection. This fear contributed to declining German tank crew morale in the war's final months." Production statistics show the stark reality German forces faced. While Germany produced approximately 6,000 Panther tanks throughout the war, American factories built over 49,000 Sherman tanks and 6,000 tank destroyers. The industrial disparity was overwhelming. By early 1945, American factories were producing more armored vehicles in a single month than Germany could build in half a year. The impact extended beyond raw numbers. American manufacturing efficiency meant that damaged tanks could be quickly repaired or replaced, while German units increasingly struggled with parts shortages and maintenance issues. German tank commander Hauptmann Franz Liebmann, captured in March 1945, told interrogators, "For every Panther we lost, the Americans seemed to have 5 replacements ready. We would destroy 3 Shermans, feeling victorious, only to face 10 more the next day." This industrial reality transformed the strategic situation. German field commanders, once confident in their qualitative edge, now faced the dual threat of American technical innovation and overwhelming quantitative superiority. Miller's technique had essentially nullified the Germans' last significant advantage, their superior armor protection. On February 9, 1945, Staff Sergeant Raymond Miller received the Distinguished Service Cross for his actions. The citation read, "For extraordinary heroism in combat on December 16, 1944. Staff Sergeant Miller's innovative combat technique and courage in the face of overwhelming odds resulted in the destruction of 9 enemy tanks and the halting of a major enemy offensive." After the ceremony, Miller spoke briefly with war correspondent Robert Thompson of the Associated Press. "I wasn't trying to be a hero," he insisted. "I just knew there had to be a better way to fight their tanks. Sometimes the book answer isn't the right answer." Captain Harrington, now promoted to major, reflected on his earlier reprimands of Miller. "Sometimes the most valuable soldiers are the ones who question doctrine." Miller saved hundreds of lives by thinking differently. Oberstleutnant Weber survived the war and was captured by American forces in April 1945. During his interrogation, he learned about Miller's technique for the first time. "One man," he said quietly, "one man with an idea stopped my entire company." When asked if this changed his view on German technological superiority, Weber replied after a long pause, "Perhaps we became too confident in our engineering. We forgot that war is ultimately decided by men, not machines." The psychological transformation extended to American forces as well. The week before Miller's ambush, captured documents revealed that many American tankers had written letters to family expressing fear of German armor. After news of Miller's success spread, morale surveys showed a dramatic increase in confidence. Lieutenant Thomas Reynolds, a tank commander with the 3rd Armored Division, wrote in his diary on January 7, 1945, "The myth of the invincible German tank is broken. If Miller could stop a whole column with one vehicle, imagine what our entire division can do now that we know how." The impact of Miller's technique extended beyond tactical considerations. Army production authorities, upon learning that precision timing was more effective than larger guns, redirected resources. Instead of rushing development of tanks with bigger weapons, they focused on improving the accuracy and rate of fire of existing systems. This decision had significant logistical benefits. The production capacity previously allocated to developing new heavy tanks was instead used to increase the output of proven designs. By March 1945, American tank production reached 4,000 units per month, compared to Germany's 250 Panthers during their peak month. In the final analysis, Miller's innovation represented more than just a tactical advantage. It embodied the American approach to warfare, adaptability, innovation, and empowering individual initiative. While German forces relied on technological superiority and rigid doctrine, American forces encouraged creative problem-solving. Major General Ernest Harmon, commander of the 2nd Armored Division, summarized this philosophy in a post-war interview. The German military believed in systems. The American military believed in people. Miller proved that one creative individual could overcome the most sophisticated enemy technology. After the war, Raymond Miller returned to Ohio and used his combat experience to secure a position as a manufacturing engineer. He developed several patented industrial processes based on the principles of rhythmic impact that he had discovered during combat. In 1963, nearly 20 years after that fateful day in the Ardennes, Miller received a letter from Heinrich Bauer, who had been the gunner in Schmidt's Panther, the second tank Miller destroyed. Bauer had survived when he was thrown clear during the ammunition explosion. "For many years, I wondered how you defeated our supposedly impenetrable tanks," Bauer wrote. "Now that I understand your method, I can only express my respect for your ingenuity. In war we were enemies, but in peace I recognize a kindred spirit, someone who sees beyond conventional wisdom." Miller replied with a simple note. "In another life, we might have been colleagues rather than opponents. The principles I discovered that day have applications far beyond destruction." The two men eventually met in 1965 during a veterans' reunion in Belgium. A photographer captured the moment when the American gunner and the German Panzer crewman shook hands beside a restored Panther tank at the Loglise Museum. The photo, published in Life magazine, became an iconic image of post-war reconciliation. The technical innovations sparked by Miller's discovery continued to influence military development throughout the Cold War. The concept of rhythmic hammering evolved into sophisticated fire control systems that could deliver precisely timed impacts, eventually leading to modern depleted uranium sabot rounds that defeat armor through kinetic energy rather than explosive force. Dr. Richard Winters, a ballistics expert at the Aberdeen Proving Grounds, wrote in a 1957 classified report, "Miller's intuitive discovery of resonant frequency effects on armor plate represents one of the most significant advances in anti-armor tactics since the development of shaped charges." The principles he identified through battlefield innovation would likely have taken laboratory researchers decades to discover under controlled conditions. The Soviet Union, having captured German technical documents describing the effectiveness of Miller's technique, incorporated similar principles into their own tank doctrine. The famous Soviet T-54-55 tanks, produced in the 1950s, featured armor designed specifically to resist rhythmic impact patterns through layered construction with different resonant frequencies. This arms race of offense and defense continued through subsequent tank generations. Miller's impact on military education proved equally significant. By the 1960s, his case study was being taught not only at West Point, but at the Soviet Frunze Military Academy, the British Royal Military Academy Sandhurst, and Israel's military schools. Each emphasized different aspects of the story. American schools focused on initiative and innovation, Soviet instructors on the importance of understanding material science, and Israeli commanders on how asymmetric tactics could overcome numerical disadvantages. Perhaps most importantly, Miller's story became a case study at military academies worldwide on the value of adaptability and critical thinking. At West Point, instructors still begin the Advanced Tank Warfare course with the question, "What would you do if you were Staff Sergeant Miller, facing 15 Panther tanks with standard ammunition that couldn't penetrate their armor?" The correct answer isn't about firing techniques or specific tactical approaches. It's about having the courage to question doctrine when faced with impossible odds. On the 30th anniversary of the Battle of the Bulge, Miller returned to the forest clearing where he had made his stand. Little remained of the battle. Nature had reclaimed the scarred earth. But as he stood there, Miller could still recall the precise rhythm that had saved so many lives. Fire, 1.7 seconds. Fire, 1.7 seconds. Fire. A small memorial plaque, installed by the Belgian government with support from American veterans associations, reads simply, "Here, one man's innovation changed the course of battle." December 16, 1944. Miller's forbidden firing pattern did more than destroy tanks. It demonstrated that ingenuity could overcome technological superiority, that doctrine should guide but never constrain, and that sometimes the most powerful weapon in war is a single creative mind. The rhythmic hammering technique developed in that snowy forest eventually found its way into NATO combat manuals, Soviet training programs, and modern digital fire control systems. Yet few who use these advanced technologies know they originated with a stubborn sergeant who refused to accept that German armor was impenetrable. Raymond Miller passed away in 1997 at the age of 77. His obituary in the New York Times noted that beyond his military achievements, he had secured 17 patents for industrial processes, all based on principles of mechanical resonance and rhythmic impact. His innovations helped American manufacturing maintain its competitive edge in the post-war era, providing jobs for thousands. His granddaughter, Dr. Emily Miller, now teaches engineering at MIT, where she begins each semester by telling her students, "The most powerful phrase in science isn't eureka. It's that's strange. I wonder why that happened." She keeps her grandfather's Distinguished Service Cross displayed in her office as a reminder that questioning established wisdom can sometimes save lives. And that concludes our story. If you made it this far, please share your thoughts in the comments. What part of this historical account surprised you most? Don't forget to subscribe for more untold stories from World War II, and check out the video on screen for another incredible tale from history. Until next time.